You usually when we talk about analyzing an economic crisis, there's this expectation of mathematical precision, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, it feels almost like structural engineering. You look at a failing economy, and the spreadsheet shows this jagged red line of hyperinflation or whatever.
Or like a massive youth unemployment rate.
Exactly. And the economist just points at the chart and is like, there it is. That's the structural failure. We just need to, you know, tweak the interest rates or adjust the quantitative easing, and the machine will hum right back to life.
Yeah, it's a deeply comforting worldview, isn't it?
It really is.
We as a society have been basically conditioned to demand that all crises be visible, like measurable, and above all solvable through these neat little formulas.
Right, like there's always an equation to fix it.
Exactly. We really want to believe that the levers of global wealth are purely mechanical, that it's all just math.
But then, you step into the world of the source materials we've been studying, this massive, just unprecedented stack of documents detailing the philosophy of this organization known as the 30K Club.
Yeah, and that's where the math just starts working.
Completely. Suddenly, that economic calculator just shatters.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet is exposed as, well, basically a smokescreen.
A total illusion.
Yeah, because these texts argue that while the working class is desperately trying to, balance their budgets using logic and arithmetic, the people who are actually hoarding the world's wealth are operating on a completely different, almost ancient frequency.
Yeah, they're using blueprints that the modern, educated mind has literally been trained to laugh at.
Right, to just dismiss his superstition.
Exactly. Which is exactly why diving into these documents requires such a radical cognitive reset. I mean, if you approach this philosophy with, like, a standard MBA mindset, you will hit a brick wall instantly.
Oh, for sure. It just won't compute.
Right, because the 30K Club asserts that the real mechanics of immense wealth and power, specifically in Southern Africa, but globally too, they are not merely financial.
Right.
They are fundamentally spiritual and psychological.
Which is wild. So welcome to the deep dive. If you are listening to this on your commute, or maybe you're sitting at a desk in some corporate office right now, get ready to look at your surroundings very differently today.
Highly recommend bracing yourself for this one.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to reach the absolute core, the very bedrock of this massive stack of documents regarding the 30K Club. We are looking at their highly guarded philosophy on wealth, power, and what they call, and this is a big term for them, ritual backing.
Yeah, we're officially looking at the final threshold of their doctrine today.
We really are. But just to set the stage for you, in our previous deep dives, we meticulously unpacked the sources covering the initial phases of this philosophy.
Right, the stuff labeled Pod 1 through 8.
Exactly. So we explored their concept of sacred enterprise. We walked through those just harrowing demographics of extreme poverty in the Southern African region.
The math there is just staggering.
It really is. I mean, the reality that over 100 million people are surviving on less than $2.15 a day.
Yeah, which we proved is just, it's a mathematical impossibility to actually survive on that.
Right. We wrote that down completely. And we also analyzed the total systemic failure of the willing buyer, willing seller land policies. We established that, mathematically speaking, the cost of a basic, dignified life is permanently out of reach for the vast majority of the population under this current system.
Yeah, we essentially mapped the physical boundaries of the prison in those earlier deep dives.
That's a good way to put it.
We looked at the sheer, unyielding arithmetic that proves the current socioeconomic matrix in that region is not just failing, but is actually designed to extract rather than sustain.
Designed to extract. Exactly. So today, we are zeroing in on the ultimate conclusion of these texts, the sources specifically from Pod 9.
The final pieces of the puzzle.
Right. And by the ends of this deep dive, we will have covered every single angle, ensuring that if you are analyzing these documents to understand how someone actually qualifies for this elusive ritual backing, absolutely nothing will stand in your way.
We're leaving no stone unturned here.
None. But before we take a single step further, there is a pretty major boundary we need to establish.
Definitely. The mandatory disclaimer.
Yes. Mandatory crystal clear disclaimer time. You, the listener, need to know that these sources contain highly charged, deeply controversial political and spiritual claims.
Very aggressive claims.
Yeah, they span aggressive critiques of global cartels. They call out what they term neo-colonial puppets. And they launch this brutal, unapologetic, psychological teardown of the modern corporate working class.
I mean, the language within these texts is uncompromising. It blends intense socioeconomic critique with these ancient spiritual frameworks in a manner that directly challenges, well, almost every conventional Western worldview.
It really pulls no punches.
No, it's provocative by design.
And so we must make it explicitly, unequivocally clear that we are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them. We are strictly acting as your impartial guides through this.
Yeah, our sole objective is just to unpack these fascinating, provocative, and frankly kind of shocking ideas exactly as they are presented in the original source material.
Exactly.
We are just mapping the architecture of their argument so you can examine it for yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this. To fully grasp the final steps of defection outlined in these concluding texts, we really have to briefly revisit that massive paradigm shift that was introduced just prior, back in Pod 8.
Right, the transition is crucial.
Because the texts make a foundational argument. You cannot possibly understand how to fight a system until you understand the true nature of the battlefield.
Makes perfect sense.
Like if you show up to a naval battle with a cavalry regiment, you've lost before you even draw your sword.
Right, your horses are just going to drown.
Exactly. And the texts argue that the modern activist, or, the modern worker, is doing exactly that. They are fighting a physical and political war, completely blind to the fact that the actual battlefield is spiritual.
Yeah, and to get there, the text demands this profound realization regarding the nature of land itself.
Article 35, right?
Yep, Article 35. It points out that across all ancient religious and indigenous traditions, from biblical scriptures to ancient African spiritual systems, land has never been viewed simply as dirt.
It's not just a commodity.
Exactly. It is never just a dead, inert asset that you just, pour concrete over to build a factory.
The soil is literally described as a living entity.
Yes, a living entity that requires active, conscious spiritual governance. And the texts present this chilling historical thesis about the colonial era.
Oh man, this part is dark.
It really is. They argue that the true violence of the colonial empires wasn't just the theft of the physical earth or drawing arbitrary borders or even the physical subjugation of the people.
Right.
The lasting devastation, the wound that still bleeds today, is that the invaders violently severed the indigenous community's spiritual connection to the land.
Right. They took sacred ground, which for centuries was governed by these communal rituals of life, seasonal harmony, and just profound respect. And they mutated it into a mere commodity.
A line item on a ledger.
Exactly. They turned a living ecosystem of spiritual stewardship into a sterile legal title deed that just gets traded in foreign capitals.
And by converting the living entity of the land into a tradable commodity, they basically blinded the original inhabitants to the true foundational source of their wealth.
But, and this is the phenomenal twist the text introduces here, it asserts that the elite monopolies, like the descendants of those colonial structures and the massive corporate cartels of today, they didn't actually abandon those spiritual principles.
No, not at all.
They only forced the masses to abandon them.
Yeah. That is the concept that completely blew my mind during my read-through. The text claims the elite monopolies are secretly operating on this ancient spiritual blueprint to maintain their dominance.
While telling everyone else it's just fairy tales.
Exactly. While intentionally conditioning the rest of us to rely strictly on science, cold logic, and this crushing cycle of debt. It is the ultimate asymmetrical warfare.
It's like sitting down to play a high-stakes board game with the world's billionaires, but they've convinced you to play by the rules of checkers.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You are carefully moving your little pieces diagonally, thinking about supply, demand, climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
Meanwhile, they are secretly using the rule book for multi-dimensional chess.
Yeah, manipulating energy, access, and unseen spiritual laws.
Exactly.
That analogy perfectly captures the systemic disadvantage. You are calculating your survival based on your monthly salary, your credit score, your KPIs. You're playing by the checkers rules.
You're just trying to make rent.
Right. You are playing on a flat two-dimensional board. But the cartels are utilizing what the texts call ritual backing, energetic circulation, and these hidden spiritual laws that actually govern human behavior and terrestrial wealth.
Wow.
And because you have been educated to believe that the multidimensional chessboard is just, a superstitious myth, you lose every single time.
You never even had a chance.
Exactly. Your community's empire remains, as the text starkly puts it, economically barren.
Which brings a deeply sinister context to the way modern economics is described in these sources,
Yeah.
especially when we move into Article 36.
Oh, absolutely.
It isn't just a flawed system of resource distribution. The text frames the entire global economic structure as a form of silent, invisible warfare.
Yeah, economics is the new oppression. It forces the reader to look at modern society and realize that the chains of subjugation haven't vanished at all.
This changed shape.
Exactly. They've merely evolved into a format that the human eye cannot easily detect. And this silent warfare is infinitely more effective than historical physical slavery.
Because it relies on the ultimate illusion.
Yes. The oppressed believe they are completely free.
Right. Because, hey, you can choose which supermarket you go to.
Exactly.
You could choose whether to finance a sedan or an SUV. You get to vote in local elections. You feel this sense of agency.
But that agency is strictly confined within a predetermined perimeter. You have the illusion of choice, but the overarching system dictates the nutritional quality of what you eat, the environmental safety of where you live, and ultimately how long your physical body can actually survive.
All based on the hyper-calculated wages they permit you to earn.
Exactly. And the text points out a terrifying demographic reality here. If the population doesn't awaken to this invisible matrix, they are consciously marching towards unimaginable suffering.
Because of the youth bulge, right?
Yes. Southern Africa has a youth bulge of 68 million young people. The system does not view those 68 million human beings as future innovators or leaders.
What do they view them as?
It views them as a massive reservoir of cheap, desperate, disposable labor just waiting to feed the corporate machine.
Man, that is incredibly bleak. But amidst this bleak diagnostic, the texts do introduce a narrative of intense strategic hope.
They do, thankfully.
Yeah, it explains that the spiritual elders of the continent actually foresaw this exact crisis.
They knew it was coming.
Right. As the world rapidly urbanized, as concrete replaced forests and traditional spiritual roots were mocked and abandoned for, Western education, these elders realized the masses would be swallowed whole by this corporate matrix.
So they made a highly calculated decision.
Right. They took the sacred knowledge of true wealth, the real multi-dimensional chess rulebook for activating the soil and commanding capital, and they buried it deep underground.
Yeah, they safeguarded the rituals within highly secretive initiations. They hid the true mechanisms of power from the corrupt, knowing that in the wrong hands, this knowledge would only create a new breed of oppressors.
So they basically put the spiritual technology on ice.
Exactly, waiting for a future generation that possessed the immense discipline required to actually wield it responsibly.
And enter the 30K Club.
Enter the 30K Club.
According to these documents, this organization claims to be the modern bridge to that ancient dormant power.
Yeah, and they aren't just teaching a mindset here. They are offering actual ritual backing, combined with heavy financial artillery.
Massive capital deployments.
Exactly. Massive capital to fundamentally rewrite the economic destiny of the region. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the texts are telling us that without recognizing this silent spiritual warfare, any political or physical resistance is entirely useless.
Wait, entirely useless, like no matter what you do.
That's what they argue. You can march in the streets until your shoes literally wear out. You can mobilize voters to elect a completely new government. You can even enact radical policies to physically seize commercial farms.
Okay.
But if your new government and your new farmers are still operating strictly under the physical laws of fiat debt, global markets, and colonial commerce, ignoring the spiritual governance of the land, they will inevitably be re-enslaved by the very financial cartels they think they just defeated.
Wow. It completely invalidates the modern concept of political activism, doesn't it?
It does.
Basically says that trying to vote your way out of a spiritual stronghold is like trying to put out a forest fire with a strongly worded petition.
That is exactly how they see it. It calls modern political activism a dangerous pacifier.
A pacifier? Gee.
Yeah, because it gives the masses the feeling of making progress while ensuring the foundational architecture of their exploitation remains completely untouched.
But, okay, if the entire global economy is operating as this rigged, inescapable mechanism of both spiritual and economic oppression, what is a single person supposed to do?
Right, that's the million-dollar question.
Because this is the massive practical dilemma that the later texts, specifically moving into Pod 9 and Article 37, address.
Yeah, the rubber really meets the road here.
Exactly. You read these documents, your eyes are open to the invisible matrix, and your immediate, visceral reaction is to fight back.
Mm.
But how do you fight a multinational monopoly when they own the grocery stores, the banks, the pharmaceutical companies, and the fuel stations?
It feels impossible.
Right. The text captures this panic perfectly. If I boycott the system, my family starves.
Yeah, and it is the ultimate psychological trap.
Oh, totally.
The system has spent the last century deliberately designing itself to be the sole provider of your biological survival.
Right.
They didn't just build supermarkets, they aggressively dismantled local, independent agriculture so that the supermarket became your literally only option.
They engineered a reality where rebellion literally feels like suicide.
Exactly.
Let's just hover on that phrase for a second. Rebellion feels like suicide because it explains so much about modern apathy.
It really does.
If walking away from the extractive system means you can't pay your rent, you can't buy formula for your infant, and you can't put fuel in your car to get to the hospital,
Yeah.
then you aren't an employee. You are a hostage.
Yeah, the system has brilliantly weaponized your own fundamental biological needs and the needs of your children.
Weaponized against your intrinsic desire for freedom.
The leverage is entirely one-sided, and this is precisely where the 30K Club's strategy executes a massive pivot away from traditional revolutionary thought.
Right, because throughout history, revolutionary movements have always demanded supreme sacrifice, haven't they?
Oh, always. They demand boycotts, strikes, people literally starving in the streets for the cause.
But the 30K Club strictly forbids this.
They do. They do not demand chaotic, uncalculated boycotts. They explicitly state they have zero use for martyrs who starve their own bloodlines in an attempt to make some symbolic point.
Which is such a pragmatic, almost cold-blooded approach to liberation.
It's very calculated.
Right. They realize that a starving, impoverished visionary is completely useless when it comes to building a new civilization.
Yeah, you can't build infrastructure if you are dying of malnutrition.
Yeah.
A dead revolutionary builds nothing.
So the strategy shifts. The text provides this deeply sophisticated alternative. It basically instructs the reader. Do not start by attempting to starve the system of your money, because you simply don't have enough leverage yet.
Exactly.
Instead, you must start by starving the system of your loyalty and your genius.
Yes, starving them of genius.
But wait, what does it practically mean to stop offering them our genius? Like, if I'm a structural engineer or a project manager or a software developer working a 9-to-5 for one of these monopolies, aren't I forced to give them my ideas? I mean, I have performance metrics.
Yeah.
I have quarterly reviews. If I stop giving them my ideas, I get fired. And we are back to my family starving. How does one practically separate their genius from their labor?
So the text addresses this directly through the principle of psychological detachment.
Psychological detachment.
Yeah. It requires a really granular understanding of where your ultimate allegiance and, more importantly, your creative surplus are actually being directed.
Okay, break that down for me.
So when you work that corporate 9-to-5, you execute your physical duties. You meet the baseline requirements of your contract to secure the financial resources your family needs to survive.
Do the bare minimum, basically.
Essentially, yes. Because the system is greedy, it doesn't just want your baseline labor, it wants your soul.
Oh, wow.
It wants you lying awake in bed at 2 a.m., stressing over their quarterly profit margins. It wants you to desperately crave their corporate validation.
Right, they want you to identify as the corporation.
Exactly. It wants you to defend their exploitative institutions when you are just chatting with your friends at a weekend barbecue. It's the extraction of your emotional and intellectual surplus.
Right, so the text argues that the true rebellion begins the millisecond. You psychologically detach your identity from their machinery.
Yes. You still do the job, you still take the paycheck, but you aggressively hoard the surplus of your creative energy.
You stop trying to innovate groundbreaking new systems for the cartel.
Right. You stop volunteering for extra committees just to win, a plastic plaque that says Employee of the Month.
Yeah, you just do the minimum required to extract their fiat currency, and you conserve your true genius. You realize the corporate ladder is a hamster wheel, and you simply stop running faster than you need to.
You step off the psychological hamster wheel. And suddenly, by doing this, you find yourself with massive reserves of reclaimed intellectual and creative energy.
Because you aren't burning it all on their problems.
Exactly. And then the text dictates the next step. You quietly, systematically redirect those reclaimed ideas, your saved capital, and your secret alliances toward building a parallel economy.
The text calls this building the alternative table, right?
Yes, the alternative table.
The logic is just flawless. You don't have to beg for a slightly bigger crumb from the monopolies table if you are secretly in the basement building a completely new table of your own.
Exactly. But let's be realistic about the mechanics of this, because building a new economic table, especially one capable of sustaining millions of people in southern Africa, that requires immense, staggering resources.
Yeah, you can't build a parallel economy with good intentions in a backyard vegetable garden.
No, not at all. It requires heavy infrastructure. It requires millions, if not billions of dollars in liquid capital.
Which brings us to the exact function of the 30K Club within these texts.
Right.
Because they were not merely a philosophical study group writing esoteric manifestos.
No, they present themselves as the central bank and the architectural firm for this new civilization.
Right. They claim to be actively deploying massive capital reserves directly into the hands of their initiated members. So they're basically financing the defection.
They are funding the escape route, literally. The texts outline the creation of decentralized, high-yield agriculture, independent supply chains that bypass cartel-controlled shipping routes, and entirely autonomous financial systems that do not rely on Western clearinghouses.
Wow.
Because they understand that you cannot tell an impoverished, heavily indebted population to simply build an alternative economy.
Right. With what money?
Exactly. The 30K Club provides the unleveraged capital and the ritual backing required so that their members can build these massive alternative structures without ever having to walk into a monopolies bank to beg for a loan.
Because the moment you walk into the monopolies bank for a commercial loan to build your competing organic farm, they own you.
Oh, instantly.
The interest rates dictate your prices, the bank covenants dictate your farming methods, and before you have even planted a single seed in the ground, you have been reabsorbed into the matrix.
You basically just become a subsidiary of the very system you are trying to escape.
Exactly. The parallel economy must be fundamentally parallel. It must be financed, structured, and spiritually governed entirely outside the existing grid.
Yes.
Which, okay, that brings us to a massive, glaring roadblock in the logic of the texts. One that any skeptical reader would immediately point out, especially when we look at Article 38.
The architecture of the Invader.
Right. Because if the soil is a living entity, and if the multi-dimensional chess rulebook is based on communal harmony, spiritual stewardship, and mutual empowerment, how did the colonial empires and these modern corporate cartels get so infinitely wealthy by stealing the land?
It's the most critical stress test of the entire philosophy.
Right. Well, let's face the historical reality.
Mm-hmm.
The invaders did not use communal rituals of life. They used gunpowder, chains, and ruthless extraction. They didn't empower the local community, they enslaved it. So why did the spiritual laws of the earth reward them with trillions of dollars in accumulated wealth?
If the spiritual laws favor harmony, why does brutality pay such high dividends?
Exactly.
The text addresses this head-on, actually. And the explanation it provides is absolutely chilling.
Yeah, it really is.
It explains that the invaders succeeded because a dark ritual is still a ritual.
A dark ritual is still a ritual.
Yeah.
That is just a horrifying concept to wrap your mind around.
It is deeply unsettling.
Because it implies the universe is mechanically neutral to the morality of the ritual so long as the energetic laws are followed.
Yeah, the text argues that the colonial empires and the corporate monopolies that evolved from them didn't simply ignore the spiritual laws of the land.
Right.
They inverted them. They brought an entirely different, highly effective spiritual architecture.
An architecture based purely on extraction.
Yes. Instead of an architecture based on cultivation, life, and the cyclical return of energy to the soil, they laid down an architecture based on extraction, blood, and the displacement of the native energy.
They built what the texts define as dark altars of commerce.
Exactly. Dark altars. And these dark altars operate on a completely different fuel source.
Which is,
well, they do not rely on the harmony of the community to generate wealth. They feed directly, almost vampirically, on the exhaustion, the terror, and the physical subjugation of the masses.
I want to dive really deep into this because the texts reevaluate the entire modern economic model of exploitation through this lens, and it might honestly be the most provocative argument in the entire stack of sources.
It's certainly most graphic.
Yeah. The text looks at a massive global mining conglomerate operating in southern Africa today. This conglomerate strips the earth of precious metals and pays the local labor force wages that mathematically guarantee starvation.
Which we proved in our earlier deep dives. Over 100 million people living on $2 a day in regions that export billions in mineral wealth.
Right. And the text argues that this mathematically engineered poverty is not just a side effect of a greedy business model. It states that it is literally, functionally, a spiritual mechanism of human sacrifice.
Yeah, we really need to pause and unpack the mechanics of that claim because it completely redefines modern capitalism.
It really does.
When we hear human sacrifice, our minds immediately go to Hollywood depictions of ancient barbaric rituals. You know, someone on a stone altar in front of a volcano or something.
Right, Indiana Jones stuff.
Exactly. But the text is forcing us to mature our understanding of sacrifice by looking at the cold mathematics of modern labor. Think about the physiological reality of a worker in that system. Let's say human biology dictates that a worker needs $15 a day to consume enough calories, access clean water, and afford the basic medicine required to maintain their physical health and normal lifespan.
But the mining cartel deliberately chooses to pay them only $2 a day, knowing full well what that deficit means.
Right. So what is actually happening to that worker's body on a molecular level?
They are dying.
Yes, they are operating in a severe caloric deficit. Their cortisol levels are permanently elevated from the chronic stress of extreme poverty, which destroys their immune system. Their physical joints are degrading without the nutrition to repair them. They are, quite literally, slowly dying. Their lifespan is being artificially compressed. Their physical vitality, their life force, is being systematically extracted day by day, hour by hour in that mine.
And the text asks the critical question. Where does that extracted life force go? Because it doesn't just vanish into the ether.
No, it is transmuted.
Right. The boardroom calculates that paying a starvation wage increases the profit margin by X%. That biological deficit in the worker is converted directly into surplus financial value.
It becomes corporate dividends.
Yes, it becomes the generational wealth of the global elite sitting in financial capitals thousands of miles away.
The text is arguing that this is not a metaphor for exploitation. It is the literal, functional definition of human sacrifice.
It's just wild.
They are feeding the dark ritual of their wealth accumulation with the slow, agonizing mathematical starvation of the working class.
The elite's multi-dimensional chessboard is powered by the biological exhaustion of the people playing checkers.
Exactly, converting the life force of trapped workers directly into stock buybacks.
It is a nauseating image, honestly. But when you look at the macroeconomics of the region, millions of brilliant youth entering an economy with 60% unemployment, massive wealth concentration where a few dozen families hold the GDP of entire nations, it's very difficult to argue against the grim logic of the text.
The math of the sacrifice checks out perfectly.
It really does. And understanding this completely shifts how you view the enemy.
Absolutely.
Because the text states that this dark spiritual grid, this altar of commerce, is so deeply entrenched in the soil and the institutions that it continues to operate flawlessly long after the original colonial architects have left.
What's fascinating here is how the text redefines modern capitalism. It views the ongoing exploitation by neo-colonial puppets and compliant politicians as the maintenance of a dark spiritual grid that was laid down centuries ago.
Right. The faces of the people managing the central banks and the government ministries might have changed. They might look like the local indigenous population now. But the dark altar of commerce they are servicing remains exactly the same.
The machine still requires the biological sacrifice of the poor to function, regardless of who is pulling the levers.
Which explains why changing the political party in power rarely changes the economic reality on the ground.
Right. If the newly elected president is just handed the keys to a dark altar, what can they do?
They have to keep feeding it.
They do. If they try to stop the human sacrifice, if they demand fair wages and equitable resource distribution, the global markets will instantly punish them.
Oh, brutally. The international banking cartels will downgrade their credit rating. Foreign direct investment will flee. Their currency will be shorted into oblivion.
And the country will collapse. They are trapped serving the altar.
So how on earth do you defeat an entity like that? I mean, how do you dismantle a spiritual and financial stronghold that is perfectly willing to starve millions of children just to maintain its quarterly profit margins?
Right.
Because, as the texts forcefully point out, you cannot simply vote it away.
No, you cannot vote it away, and you cannot gently outcompete it through standard free market enterprise.
Right. Because the cartels have a centuries-long head start and hold trillions of dollars in stolen leveraged capital.
If you try to play their game, they will crush you.
So this is where the 30K Club introduces what they call the superior blueprint.
Yes. Their solution is a radical, almost paradoxical synthesis. They argue that you cannot fight a raging inferno with a bucket of water. Sometimes you have to fight fire with a highly controlled, superior explosion.
Wow.
The 30K Club aims to violently merge the aggressive, massive capital mechanics of the modern world with the ancient, sacred rituals of community empowerment.
They're bringing modern financial artillery to an ancient spiritual war.
Exactly. They provide their initiated members with the millions of dollars required to physically outmaneuver the cartels, to buy back the infrastructure, the supply chains, and the physical soil.
But crucially, the money alone is useless without the second component.
Right. They provide the ritual backing required to spiritually cleanse that soil.
Which, okay, what does that actually mean in practical terms, cleansing the soil? Because it sounds very esoteric.
It does, but in the context of their philosophy, cleansing the soil means dismantling the dark architecture of extraction that was placed over it.
Okay.
It means stopping the cycle of human sacrifice on that specific plot of land or within that specific enterprise. It means instituting business practices and communal ecosystems that pump life, resources, and vitality back into the local population rather than extracting it for a foreign dividend.
It is the spiritual reactivation of the land's original harmonious frequency, funded by overwhelming capital.
As the text emphatically declares, we are not just buying back the land, we are taking back its soul.
Taking back its soul, man, that is an incredibly powerful, sweeping mandate. But examining this brings us to a massive psychological roadblock in the texts, specifically in Article 39.
Yes, the courage to starve the ego.
Right. Because we now have a clear picture of the enemy, this dark architecture of extraction and human sacrifice. We understand the weapon being offered, the parallel economy, backed by massive capital and ancient ritual activation. The logical question just screams out. Why isn't every intelligent, capable person in the region rushing to sign up?
Exactly. If this blueprint exists and the capital is waiting to be deployed, what is the final, ultimate barrier stopping millions of brilliant professionals from defecting and building this new civilization?
And that question leads us directly into the final, most confronting section of the texts. It reveals that the biggest enemy to this liberation movement is actually not the corrupt government.
Yeah.
It is not even the billionaire monopolies or the dark altars. The ultimate barrier to economic liberation is actually looking back at us in the mirror every single morning.
Yeah, it forces the reader into a highly uncomfortable state of self-reflection.
Brutal self-reflection. The section is literally titled The Courage to Starve the Ego, and it's a just unsparing psychological dissection of the modern educated professional.
It really is. The text argues that the ultimate barrier keeping the matrix intact is the sheer vanity of the educated working class.
The vanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It points out a glaring contradiction in modern society. People know the system is extracting their life. It is no longer a hidden secret.
Right. Everyone knows it.
You know your corporate salary is losing its purchasing power every month due to hyperinflation. You know you can barely afford the mortgage on your suburban home despite having 2 degrees.
Yep.
You know the corporate empire you are sacrificing your weekends to build will completely abandon you the moment you develop a chronic illness or the moment artificial intelligence can automate your job.
You know the math doesn't work. You know the building is structurally compromised. Yet you stay.
You stay. You wake up, you put on your suit, and you march right back into the machinery. And the text asks the agonizing question, why?
Why do you stay in a system that is bleeding you dry?
According to the philosophy of the 30K Club, you stay because the monopoly pays you with a false sense of prestige.
Ah, the false sense of prestige. The text refers to these careers as high-paying hostage situations.
Which is such a brilliant phrase.
It is, and the psychology behind that phrase is absolutely fascinating. It's the ultimate illusion of safety. Picture this. You're sitting inside a massive corporate skyscraper. The building is on fire. The smoke is filling the room, the foundation is cracking, and the alarms are blaring. You know the building's going to collapse.
Right.
But you absolutely refuse to leave your office because the cartel that owns the building gave you a really nice corner view and a fancy brass plaque on your door that says, Senior Vice President of Operations.
You are terrified of losing that title.
Exactly. You are terrified of giving up the company-leased BMW. So you sit at your desk, coughing on the smoke, choosing the illusion of status over your actual survival.
You are choosing the optics of success over actual sovereignty. The system has brilliantly intertwined your biological survival with your social identity.
It's sick, honestly.
It is. The text says you are paralyzed by the fear of losing the social validation that comes from serving the power-hungry elite. When you go to a weekend dinner party, you want to be able to introduce yourself with a grand title. I am the regional director of a multinational bank.
It gives your ego a temporary, intoxicating hit of dopamine.
Exactly. It makes you feel important, masking the mathematical reality that you are, as the text ruthlessly calls it, a celebrated slave in the light.
A celebrated slave in the light.
Yeah.
You have the tailored suit, you have the platinum credit card, you have the corner office. But mathematically, you are one missed paycheck or one corporate restructuring away from total financial ruin.
And spiritually, you are completely bankrupt because you are spending your life force managing a dark altar of commerce.
And breaking free from that matrix requires an action that the modern Western-educated ego finds almost intolerable.
It requires what the text explicitly refers to as a temporary, agonizing humiliation.
Humiliation. Let's dig into that for a second. If the barrier to leaving isn't financial, because, as we established, the 30K Club is offering the capital, then the barrier is purely pride. Why is humiliation a mandatory step in this process?
Because to successfully defect, you have to publicly admit that your entire prestigious career has been a lie.
Oh, that's heavy.
You have to admit to yourself and potentially to your family that you were never a master of the universe. You were a well-dressed hostage.
Right.
And then you have to be willing to physically walk away from that comforting illusion of safety. You must step out of the warm, celebrated spotlight of the corporate world, and you must begin building something from scratch, in the dirt, in the shadows.
You have to look your peers in the eye, peers who are still desperately worshiping the corporate ladder, and tell them you are walking away from the safety of the multinational cartel to go build decentralized agriculture or autonomous finance systems outside the grid.
And let's be honest about human nature. They will think you have lost your mind.
Oh, they will definitely look down on you.
They will pity you initially. They will mock you behind your back because they are still judging your actions by the rules of checkers.
They don't realize you have just stepped onto the multi-dimensional chessboard.
Exactly. The text demands that you possess the internal fortitude to endure that social humiliation without flinching. You have to make a definitive internal decision that you would rather build an independent, sovereign civilization in the shadows than remain a decorated, celebrated prisoner in their matrix.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is analyzing these texts right now, perhaps looking at their own corporate brass plaque and trying to figure out if they actually have what it takes to join an organization like the 30K Club?
The final takeaway is that before you ever have to worry about mastering the spiritual mechanics or understanding the ancient rituals or managing millions of dollars in deployed capital, you have to win a brutal war inside your own mind. The extractive systems rely entirely on your vanity to keep you compliant. If you prioritize societal status, public validation, and the comfort of blending in with the crowd over true, rugged, independent sovereignty, the system already owns you.
And the 30K Club cannot use you.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate decision point, finalizing the eligibility requirements for the 30K Club. We have arrived at the absolute core of the entire document stack.
We are removing the final veil here to ensure there is absolutely no ambiguity about what this organization demands in exchange for their ritual backing and capital.
Right. The final non-negotiable mandate is the complete death of the corporate ego.
Yes. The texts are very explicit about their initiation process, which they refer to as the dark room.
In a dark room.
Yeah. Before an initiate ever steps foot into that space, they must have already surgically removed their need for public, systemic validation.
The 30K Club does not care about the impressive title on your resume.
Not even a little bit.
They do not care that you were a senior vice president or a chief financial officer. In fact, the text suggests that such a background might actually be a liability if you haven't fully psychologically detached from it.
Exactly. What they are analyzing is your discipline, your raw capacity to build infrastructure, and your ability to operate without needing a round of applause.
They are offering the ultimate radical trade here.
They really are. They offer the massive, unleveraged capital required to replace your corporate salary 10 times over, allowing you to build real generational infrastructure.
And they offer the ancient ritual backing to spiritually protect you and your enterprise from the dark architecture of the cartels.
But the absolute price of admission is the surrender of your ego and a blood oath commitment to absolute self-accountability.
You must become a vessel of uncompromising integrity, entirely immune to the whispers, the mockery, and the temptations of the crowd.
It functions as a phenomenal psychological and spiritual filter, honestly.
It really does. If you think about the design of that requirement, anyone who is driven purely by greed, narcissism, or vanity will inevitably fail the test.
They simply won't be able to handle the temporary humiliation of stepping into the shadows. They will crave the spotlight too much.
The system naturally selects only those individuals who genuinely want to build a new civilization, rather than those who just want to use the capital to buy a bigger yacht and show off to their old corporate friends.
It is a brilliant safeguard. It ensures that the immense power of the ritual backing and the financial artillery is only handed to those who will use it to empower the community.
It guarantees that the initiates will fulfill the very first commandment of sacred enterprise that we studied weeks ago, the mandate to serve humanity rather than exploit it.
Exactly.
Well, mission accomplished. Let's take a deep breath and review the incredible journey we've been on through this massive stack of documents.
It has been a wild ride.
We started by looking at the stark, unforgiving mathematical reality of Southern Africa, the sheer impossibility of survival for the masses under the current economic rules.
We saw how traditional political activism and land reform policies have utterly failed to break the iron grip of the global monopolies.
We then ventured into the hidden layer of the conflict, uncovering the spiritual warfare of economics.
We examined the hidden architecture of the invader, defining the dark altars of commerce that quite literally feed on the biological exhaustion and human sacrifice of the working class.
We learned the tactical brilliance of the parallel economy, why boycotts are a trap, and why you must instead starve the system of your loyalty and your surplus genius.
And finally, we confronted the ultimate internal barrier, the courage to starve your own ego, to endure the temporary humiliation of peer judgment, and to physically and psychologically walk away from the high-paying hostage situation of the corporate world.
The blueprint for the 30K Club's eligibility is now fully illuminated. It demands a radical, total departure from everything modern Western-educated society teaches us to value.
It flips the entire paradigm upside down.
It really does. And honestly, spending this much time in these texts leaves you looking at the world, at your own job, at the city skyline outside your window, in a completely different, almost unsettling way. You start seeing the invisible grid everywhere.
You cannot unsee the architecture once it has been pointed out.
No, you can't. But before we sign off, there's one last, deeply provocative thought that these concluding texts force us to consider. It is a question that builds on everything we've discussed today, and it points to a very grim horizon.
Think about the ultimate trajectory of this philosophy.
Let's hear it. Leave us with the final thought.
If the 30K Club strategy actually works, if this massive parallel economy successfully recruits and extracts all the true builders, the hidden innovators, and the surplus genius from the current system, what happens to the people who are too proud to leave? Consider the mechanics of the Dark Altar. It requires human genius and life force to function. When the dark ritual of the monopolies finally begins to collapse under its own staggering weight because it has been starved of the genius it needs to innovate and survive, what happens to the loyalists?
Wow.
Will the educated working class, the ones who desperately clung to their fancy titles, their BMWs, and their corner offices to avoid humiliation, will they simply be left going down with the ship?
That is a terrifying image. Are you just sitting at your desk in a structurally failing building, proudly polishing your brass plaque, waiting for the roof to inevitably cave in? Because according to the math and the spiritual laws of the text, the collapse isn't a possibility. It is a certainty. It is just a matter of time. Thank you for joining us on this intense, challenging, and deeply fascinating deep dive. We will see you next time.